Hey YouTube, this is Daddy-O's Reviews, back with you again. Hey, I had a question in one of my videos about the differences between single oak and double oak soles. I'm actually going to expand that question and start talking a little bit about welting on shoes, and what I mean by that is examples that you see in front of you are Goodyear welts. That's the way that the sole is actually attached to the upper of the shoe. So I'll cover that in this video as well. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and start with the shoe that is probably the easiest to understand and see visually how the welting works. So this is an example of the Allen Edmonds Park Avenue. It is a single oak Goodyear welted shoe. And as you can see, this is in black shell cordovan. So what do all those terms mean that I just used? Well, the Goodyear welt, so if I can get this to zoom in, I'm going to play with my camera here for a second. If you see that top section, the kind of glossier portion of leather, right where my fingernail is, that's called the welt. And the welt is a piece of leather. I guess some manufacturers might use plastic or rubber, but most good manufacturers, it's going to be a strip of leather that runs around the entire outside of the shoe, and that piece is actually attached to the upper. There's a way, it's called a Goodyear welting. There's a way to do that which actually attaches on the inside of the shoe from the upper of the shoe diagonally, so it would be diagonally out this direction, into the welt, and that attaches the welt to the upper. Then what the manufacturers do is they actually put an insole. You can see in this case it's a leather insole, light brown in color. They put an insole into the shoe. Then they put a layer of cork between the insole and the outsole of the shoe. So you have the insole, you got the Goodyear welt, then they put a layer of hot cork, and it's basically flattened so that as time goes on, the shoes form to your foot. Then they put a leather outsole on, and they sew the welt down through the leather outsole, and that's what you see around the edge of these shoes and a lot of other shoes that I do videos on. So that's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, when it's time to replace the sole, it's actually very easy to do. You can take it to a cobbler, or you can take it, send it back to the manufacturer, and they have a tool that they use to basically slip in between the welt and the outsole, break, or I should say cut, that strip of stitching that goes around the whole outside of the shoe, and then they separate the outsole. They scrape off the cork that's in there. They put a new layer of cork, they put a new outsole, and the shoe's good to go for another however long you wear it. So that's how the Goodyear welting works. So in this case, on the Allen Edmonds Park Avenue, you have basically, as I always tell in my videos, this is a cap toe Balmoral with a Goodyear welt and a single oak sole. And then you have a stacked leather heel back here as well. So what all those terms mean, I went through some of them, but the important thing, and as I'm about to segue to the next shoe, it has a 360-degree Goodyear welt. And that means that this welting, which I just described, goes all the way the entire outside of the shoe. And I'll contrast that with another similar shoe. This is also a Balmoral. This is Alden for Brooks Brothers. And again, we have the same approach. We have a Goodyear welt, but it's only 270 degrees. It basically stops here. Then you have what they call a closed heel. And then it picks up here again with the Goodyear welt and goes around the front of the shoe. In addition to that difference, Alden also does what they call wheeling around the top of the welt. And that's nothing more than the way that stitching goes down through the outsole. There's a decorative item which puts wheeling on the top of that welt. So that's the major difference. Again, Alden does 270 degree on some of their shoes, but they do 360 on others. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But that's a single oak, 270 degree Goodyear welted shoe right there. And this one's in burgundy shell cordovan, they call it. call it burgundy, but it's more brown really. Then the shoe right next to it is actually identical, but the difference is I have actually had a toppy applied to it. And so what I did is I took this to a local cobbler and I had him glue a rubber top onto the top of that single oak sole. I did that so that it would last longer when I have to wear these in the wet weather. Other than that, it's identical to the shoe we just went through, so I won't spend any more time on that. Here we have an Alden loafer. And so this again is a single oak, 270 degree Goodyear welted shoe. I bring this out as an example because the outsole is actually getting a little bit thin. You can probably see me kind of pressing on that in a section right here. May have to get these resoled here fairly soon. But I also used it as an example because you can really see the line, the delineation there between the welt and the single oak sole. So that's the single oak soles, single oak soled shoes. I mentioned that Alden also does a more traditional heel on some of their shoes. And so this is an example of a shoe just like that. So this is still Goodyear welted. We still have the wheeling on the top. However, we have a double oak sole here. And you'll notice that the Goodyear welt goes all the way around the heel. So this is a 360 degree Goodyear welted double oak sole. So the reasons why you'd want double oak, well, it looks more sturdy. So I have a large foot. I don't mind having double oak soles. I think they don't look out of place. If I had a smaller foot, I'd have to really give it consideration. But the real reason that I think double oak soles sort of rose in popularity in the past is because they last a whole lot longer. You can kind of see you have the line of the welt here, then you have the first sole, and then the second sole is actually even thicker than the first sole. So you can get a whole lot of wear out of a shoe that has a double oak sole. And so if you're going to be walking long distances, it will last longer. The other thing is because of the thickness, it kind of acts as a shock absorber. So if you're walking long distances and maybe on concrete or roads, you could see how this would be more comfortable because it smooths out that surface and it doesn't have doesn't make your foot deal with the uncomfortable things that you may be stepping on. So that's an example of an Alden 360 degree welted double oak sole. And then I also have, it's not in front of you right now, but here it comes. This is an Edmonds 360 degree double oak sole. Now a couple of things I'll point out. Notice Edmonds does not do the wheeling on the top of the welt. So now that you understand what that means, you can kind of decide whether that is something that you want to have or not. Alden also uses a different kind of sole. Edmonds uses a different kind of sole. They use J. Rendenbach soles, that they have the reputation for being among the hardest leathers and therefore the longest lasting. And again, you can see in the reflection the welt, the first sole, then the second sole on the edge here. So that's an Edmonds example. Here we have the McNeil's. I've done a lot of videos on this. This is the first shoe that we've gone through on this video, where we not only have a double oak sole, we also have what's called a storm welt, sometimes called a split reverse welt. And what that is basically doing, I'll find a good place to show you. I apologize, the welts are a little bit dusty in these. What that's basically doing is that is where the manufacturer actually sews the upper onto the welt is through this upper section. Really, I think it's more of a fashion thing at this point. But it's also worth noting that on this particular pair, Edmonds also did the wheeling, so you can kind of see that on the very edge here. It has a decorative patch there. Next to that shoe, we have the Alden version of the same. And on this one, you can clearly see the stitching that attaches that split reverse or storm welt onto the upper. And then separately, you see the stitching that stitches that welt down to the outsole. And this is a double oak. It's a great example right here because I haven't done any edge treatment. The welt, first sole, second sole. So that's a double oak leather sole. Very well worn, as I've done videos on these in the past. But they also last a very long time. Then the last one that I'll show on this video is actually an example of the Crockett and Jones. This is one that they did for Ralph Lauren. But the Crockett and Jones version of a split reverse welt with a double oak sole. And again, because of the color of the edge here, you can really see those lines of delineation. So we have the welt, then we have the first sole, then the second sole. And actually, if you look at that, it almost looks like they've put 3 very thin soles on these. But effectively, it's the same thickness as a double oak sole. Lasts a nice long time. So that is, I guess, my, ended up being a 12-minute video on welts and soles in fine men's shoes. Last item, didn't talk about this yet. I mentioned the fact that a lot of times the manufacturers simply sew the welt down to the sole, and others actually have a hidden stitch here. So as they're manufacturing the shoe, they hide that external stitch. Again, that's mostly a decorative item. And then finally, I talked about how easy it is for a manufacturer to replace the outsole if we have a Goodyear manufactured, Goodyear welted shoe. The other thing that it does is it's more comfortable, because you can imagine if instead of this stitching going up into the welt, if that stitching actually went into the shoe, sort of like a moccasin construction, then anytime that you're walking through water, that stitching will automatically wick the water up into the shoe, and so your feet get wet. So this not only aids in the ability to take off these soles after they get worn out and replace them, but it also increases the comfort of the wearer. So with that as my last comment, if you have any further questions on this topic or would like to see more, please post in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching.